you're telling us that power usage is a major issue for most organisations, and you're able to tell us there about what's being done to deal with it in the future, and that's very helpful. What contribution do you think overall that IT can make to organisations to deal with their own environmental issues? So we've talked a bit about the issues related to the use of IT and the impact that has on the environment. To what degree do you think that technology can help organisations in the wide operations that they have, more generally inside their organisation?
Yeah, this is a very important point, because the estimates for how much energy or carbon emissions that the IT industry itself uses is around 2%. So you could reduce that by 50%, and so great, you're down to 1%. What about the other 98, 99% of the energy that's being used in its society and the economy? And this is where IT, using IT in innovative ways can really help. I mean, if you think about email, classic example. Once upon a time we used to use a lot of paper in the office just to send memos around. Now we don't. There's not a whole lot of paper being transmitted now. Admittedly, the goal of a paperless office is probably still a long way away for most organizations. But for instance, at Microsoft, I don't see paper. I don't get pay stubs. All of my forms are signed electronically. I don't really get anything paper at all. Frankly, the thing we seem to see most of on paper are PowerPoint presentations, which are so dense that you can't project them on the screen and have anyone read them. So that's sort of the typical use of paper around here. So there are lots of tools and technologies to help people reduce the amount of paper they consume. Of course, paper is, requires trees to be cut down, transported, processed, etc., etc. So doing that directly via with electrons is a much more efficient way, particularly if you don't intend on keeping that paper around for a long time after you've read it. We did a study recently with Jonathan Koomey from Stanford to actually show the impact of digital downloads on energy use and carbon, and it was really eye-opening in that the actual consumption of media is much more efficient in most cases if you consume it digitally, as opposed to going to the store and buying a CD. What's particularly interesting, though, is that a lot of the carbon footprint of acquiring a physical CD was the actual trip to the store to go get it. It was like half the footprint, and so that sort of leads to other scenarios where it's, well, how can we use technology to avoid traveling? So, for instance, you and I are talking via Skype right now. Theoretically, we could have flown to each other and done a face-to-face interview, which was the way you would have had to do it a few years ago if you actually wanted something on video. And so technologies like that can definitely help avoid moving us around, where basically digitizing or dematerializing the economy. Other scenarios around orchestration of various component parts of the system, so that you aren't all trying to use the same resource at the same time. Classic case of this is the smart grid. So for instance, we don't really have good intelligence today that's presented to us as consumers as to when the grid is stressed. So we'll just turn on our air conditioning and our lights and dishwashers and washing machines and everything else whenever we feel like it, regardless of whether the grid has a lot of excess energy or is about to have a blackout. And so using information technology to help communicate and incent the right behavior is the critical aspect. You can actually take the smart grid and think about the road network in a similar way. The road network shares a lot of similar characteristics to the grid in the sense that it's a shared resource and folks just tend to use it whenever they feel like. And so you can think about both scenarios like orchestration, so dynamic time of day tolling, actually potentially providing information to end users on traffic conditions and maybe when would the best time to travel be, as well as actually trying to figure out how to actually more effectively use the resources on the road. How many of us drive around with 3 empty seats in the car? Simply because we don't have a good mechanism to actually fill them. We know that there's probably someone else going to a destination similar to us, but the overhead of actually trying to figure out who that person is too hard unless you use something like information technology and you're sharing that information and having services in the cloud maybe broker that exchange of information for you. So all you have to do is just say yes or no. The heavy lifting is essentially done by technology. So lots of different ways. I mean, the sky's the limit. There's a lot of resource sharing sites popping up now which help you avoid buying stuff, and so you can treat physical goods more like a service. Whether that's something like a zip car where you're trying to get from point A to point B, but owning a car doesn't make sense for the amount of times you actually need a vehicle. Whether a site like Neighbor Goods, which is allowing you to share tools and whatever with your neighbors, so you don't have to have a whole bunch of stuff in your garage just for the odd time that you need it. So yeah, lots and lots of really interesting opportunities to help us use the resources we have more effectively without continually creating new ones.
Thanks, Mark. And the another area that you've already touched on a little bit is IT end of life. We see images of computers being dismantled in poorer parts of the world, often China, with toxic results in terms of the impact on the local environment and also on the health of the people who are taking computers apart and recovering the elements from inside them. What do you see as alternatives to that, and what do you think can be done about it?
Yeah, it's a tough situation because we generate a huge amount of e-waste, and certainly there's a number of steps you can do. One is reuse it. Before you recycle it, and I think that's key. And there's a lot of potential to reuse PCs in other applications that might just be sitting in people's closets until they essentially become useless. So if you've got devices sitting out there that you aren't using, get them back into the hands of a reputable recycler. One that can certify that they aren't going to just go send it to Africa or China, where it's just going to be dismantled by hand or just rot into the soil. Reusing those things is critical. So and then you sort of comes down to end of life. Obviously at a certain point in time that piece of equipment is either going to break or it's going to become obsolete. And things like ePeat actually help address that sort of at design time, where you can actually cost effectively disassemble it. And I think as we start running out of resources, and as you probably read or heard recently, the US is suing or I can't remember the actual legal mechanism is, but they're complaining to the World Trade Organization that China is basically keeping all of the rare earths to itself. Well, there's a lot of rare earths in all of our e-waste stream. If we design the computers effectively in the first place, actually makes it easier and more cost-effective to dismantle them. The reality is the price of rare earths is such now that it actually already is cost-effective to recover those materials from the computers. And then that's essentially what they're doing in China and Africa anyway, just doing it under sort of very hazardous conditions. So we need to make that easier, safer. There needs to be accountability and verifiability when so an organization like Microsoft is handing its old equipment to an organization. We need assurance that equipment is not going to end up in a landfill or being disposed of in a dangerous way. And so that there's a lot of things that can happen there. I think EP is probably the best sort of hope we have in terms of a standard program that's simple enough for people to wrap their heads around. That ultimately simplicity is the key.
Absolutely, and you mentioned there the activities of the U.S. government with their legal action. What role overall do you think that governments have in green IT, in ensuring that we become more environmentally conscious and that things happen?
Yeah, it's interesting because there's a number of different roles that